When you're considering a variety of different religious leaders that there are in this world, one of the questions that a person needs to ask is, what differentiates Jesus? I mean, why would you follow Jesus as opposed to Muhammad, or Buddha as opposed to Krishna, or Zoroaster as opposed to Jesus? What kind of standards could be used? Well, I think it's important to take a look at each of the different religious leaders and ask, why should I trust them? What elements are there that make them trustworthy? I've done a careful study of the leaders of the largest religions in the history of the world, and I found that there are certain categories that puts Jesus head and shoulders above the rest of them. Here's some things that I would encourage you to examine as you take a look at world religions. You may have some different standards. I would just say apply them universally across the different religious leaders and see how they come out when they compare with one another. My guess is you'll come to the same conclusion as me, that Jesus stands head and shoulders above the competition. One of the things you have to look at is, what are their teachings? What are their teachings? Now, there are a lot of teachers that have given great teachings in this world, aren't there? I mean, you have people like the Buddha, or Muhammad, or Confucius, or, of course, Jesus. And I would say that among all of them, you can give them lots of credit for the teachings that they have. Now, the most known teachings in the world belong to Jesus. The best-selling book in world history is the Bible, which contains the words of Jesus. The most people who follow a teacher is Jesus, by a 2-to-1 margin for the next closest competition, which would be Islam. If you take a look at what's most read, most sung about, most memorized, most thought about, most critiqued words in the world, it would be the words of Jesus. So Jesus would win in the category of teachings. But you've got to give credit to some other religious leaders also for having some good and compelling teachings that are out there. Category number 2 would be the question of morality. Morality. Now, there are some teachers in history that have gone through living by high moral standards. The Buddha is considered to have lived by high moral standards, and so was Confucius. But each of the different religious leaders has said, although I live by good moral standards, I'm not perfect. As a matter of fact, the more spiritually mature you find a person, the more ready they are to admit just how imperfect they are, with one exception. And that exception is the person of Jesus, who claimed that he was perfectly moral, that he had never done anything wrong. What's more than that, when Jesus went on trial for doing things that were wrong in order to be able to die on the cross, they couldn't even find people that could say anything that Jesus had done wrong. They had to bring in some liars to talk about it, and of course they accused him of claiming to be the Son of God, which, if it was true, is not problematic. Not only did Jesus' enemies say he was perfect, and Jesus claimed he was perfect, but what's perhaps the most noteworthy is that even his closest friends said he was perfect. His best friends, who hung out with him every day, day in and day out for 3 years. Now, you could ask my friends, you could ask my wife in particular, is Mark perfect? And they would have a very clear answer for you. No, he's not even close. Let me show you the list of his imperfections. But Jesus' friends didn't say that. Jesus' friends said he was perfect. He never did wrong. There was no guile in his mouth. He never lied. He never deceived. Jesus gets perfect marks on this category and goes way above the rest of the competition. The third thing to ask is, what were their claims about themselves? What were their claims about themselves, and how did they justify those claims? Most prophets claim to be good prophets. Most teachers claim to be good teachers. Religious leaders can oftentimes claim to be religious leaders. The Buddha claimed that he was a Buddha, an enlightened one. Jesus' claims were that he was in fact the Son of God. That he was the one who was coming as not only God's representative, but he was God in the flesh. And a number of times in both public and private, he made this claim in very strong ways that any Jewish person could understand that. He claimed to be God, not just a good prophet. Now, the next thing that has to be asked when somebody makes a crazy level of claims like Jesus did is, what did they do to justify their claims? How did they prove that their claims themselves were true? Now, if you just claim to be a prophet, you just walk around saying smart sayings. But if you claim to be God, you had better be able to bend the laws of nature the same way that God does. You had better be able to be doing miracles. And Jesus did miracles, tons of miracles. A man who was born with a hand that was knotted up like this, Jesus healed him. People who were born blind, Jesus healed them. People that had demon possession, Jesus was able to cast out the demons. Jesus raised people from the dead. He walked on water. He turned water into wine. He did these things in a public place with people he had never met before, so that if he needed to be disproven, it could be disproven publicly. But the truth is, everybody who saw him was amazed at the miracles that he did, and his miracles justified his claims. I don't care what other religious leader you look at, there is no other leader who did this level of miracles that support the claims to be God. Jesus moves into a category that is utterly by himself. So now he's the best teacher. He's the most moral and the only one to have lived a perfect life. He makes the most audacious claims, and he has the most miracles that justify those claims. And the final question you have to ask is the question, what happened at the end of their life? What happened in their death? Who has the most memorable death in all of history? Well, Socrates' death is pretty famous when he took the hemlock in a very dramatic kind of a moral fashion. But people can barely remember how other religious leaders have died. They died and they stayed dead. They're still 6 feet under. But Jesus' death, the death on the cross, is the most famous death in all of world history. And people remember it and wear symbols about it and celebrate it and talk about it all the time. But not only was his death the grand finale, the real grand finale was Jesus' resurrection from the dead. And in rising from the dead, Jesus proved that death can't hold him down. That he can beat death and beat sin and beat Satan and beat anything that is related to death. Now Jesus has demonstrated that he can break the death barrier. How many people in world history do you know that predicted their own resurrection and then pulled it off? There's only one who's ever done that, and that's Jesus himself. Why would you hold on tight to Jesus in a world of religious leaders? 5 reasons. They're kind of like the 5 fingers of your hand. His teachings, his morality, his claims, his miracles, and then his death and resurrection. They give you a strong grip on what's true, more importantly, on who is true.